Should we go back? Actually, Sarah, can you explain what was the language in the 13th Amendment, that loophole that transitioned us to? Because the better part, like one of the interesting things I found about 13th was the visual timeline and then the showing of how the prison numbers just exponentially grew over time. But how did we get to that? What was the language, if you remember?
So the 13th Amendment says no person can be a slave, or like everyone is free.
Which is good. Except
for those who have been charged with a crime. So that's why you can have prison labor for free. You don't have to pay them because they're paying their debt back to society.
Yeah. That was terrible.
Yeah, I forgot where the screen is. I have a slideshow put up, not in order. You know what? I should have set up the hotkey so I can get to it. We'll eventually play it through, but I think in the beginning there were some like data text or text from someone who was like, don't quote me on this or don't record me, and he was like dropping the N-bomb. And he was saying you can't say that anymore.
Is it when they were talking about the Southern strategy?
Yeah, Southern strategy, exactly.
In the very beginning. But I mean, it was just an indicator to me, or a reaffirmation that sure, slavery ended, but there are unfortunately some minds out there that sought to, work around that.
Yeah, because the documentary really talks about how slavery like transformed through the ages. Like I think I wrote down at the end, like slavery.
You want to run us through that? Yeah.
Yeah. Slavery, which supposedly ended in 1865, and then after that, there was convict leasing. So, because the South was like, "Oh, our economy's in tatters because we can't use slaves anymore. So, how can we use the language of the 13th Amendment to get the free labor that we're missing?" And they started arresting African Americans en masse
for just like very tiny, like minor offenses, like basically loitering, if that's the word.
Yeah, for tiny offenses, in order to make them.
How come loitering is an offense?
Well, I mean, maybe if you have like a business, you don't want like people just hanging around. Do you remember like McDonald's? They had the McDonald's brothers first started out with like a drive-in type situation, and then they converted where it was no longer drive-in, and they got rid of like the vending machines on the outside just to create a more an attractive location for families to come in, instead of like teens hanging around in front of the store smoking cigarettes or doing whatever. So maybe that's where loitering came about.
Yes, and I guess that was crazy. Okay, continue please.
So they got that labor that way, and that turned into Jim Crow laws throughout most of the 20th century, until the 60s and 70s and civil rights movements, and then that's when we started to see the mass incarceration.
Was that around the war on drugs time?
Yeah.
That's the start of it?
Yeah, the war on drugs.
Yeah.
Nixon and Reagan's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the numbers jumped. They were crazy, right? I mean, they went from like 100,000, double that, and then where did they end up?
2.3 million?
Something million, yeah. Jeez. The crazy part about war on crimes was like the comparison between the degree of offense for if you're holding like cocaine versus crack, because cocaine was this luxury product that white community usually like handling, and crack was basically black folks material, and it was just so shocking to know that the amount of penalty that they are going to receive, which should be basically the same, wasn't the same, because the law was written in a way to.
So which is the one to use if you want to use it? Is it crack or cocaine?
I will go for none.
Cocaine's the expensive stuff.
Yeah. So cocaine is the expensive stuff. Yeah, but it's basically, that was terrible to know that, poor like drug addicts, because they are doing crack, they have to face like, I don't know how many times more, 10 times more than if they are holding like cocaine. So it was just like crazy.
Yeah, and it's just like a repeating cycle, right? I mean, just think about how, like, I don't know if enough thought has like been put into, well, what led, you know, a large group of people to end up using drugs. You know, and when you're a drug addict, there's a chance that, you know, criminality becomes a part of your life, right? Because you need to afford the drugs. But what happened before that? What got them into that state? How was their mental health before then? How did they grow up, right? Like you said earlier, yes, like, you know, lack of education is a huge thing, right? What about like affordable housing? If you're growing up, moving, I mean, we worked with Habitat for Humanity, right? And that's a big problem because some people, you know, they have to go from house to house. There's no stability in there. I've worked with a therapist that, you know, just really like hones in on the fact that stability ages like 0 through, I don't know, 13 or so, like important. So this is, you know, shaping. And on top of that, there's such a long history that these kids grow up being taught from their parents to fear the police, right? You know, so it's already setting people on different sides and, you know, on opposing, you know, sides. So, you know, this leads to mental health. This leads to, you know, like maybe even physical health, right? And then what happens if you're struggling with, you know, with things like that? I mean, drugs are, you know, a thing that alters your mind, right?
Yes, and also I was reading somewhere that basically being the criminal or being part of the gang for a lot of kids who grew up in like poor neighborhoods is their way of getting the respect that they had never had the chance to get from their society, their teachers, their classmates, their family members. So they don't have any other option.
And we're tribal people. You know, we want, you know, a group to be a part of. Right. So
when there is such high arrest rates and people's family members are being taken away, like people's parents, it's less people to take care of the kids. And not had so it's more of an unstable life.
That sucks.
Yeah, and the sad news is like we still run into the same issues, really. Today, which leads to kind of the same results and symptoms.
I mean, I think this documentary does a good job about how about explaining how a lot, like all the problems we're facing today, have, you know, these roots in history and were made because of people's decisions and the chain of events. Yeah,
it was so like sucky to see towards the end. They had like black and white stills and video of like protests in the street, these grainy footage of African Americans being like pushed and attacked. And then you fast forward decades later, and then you see the same thing happening in vivid HD color, like at Trump rallies or on the streets.
Yeah,
you know, people elbowing.
Record it better now.
Yeah. So it's like, man, really? I thought stuff got better, and I'm sure it did. But you know, just seeing those images back to back makes me question, like, how much did we really improve? Please feel free to like and subscribe. Ask these people.
Yeah, hit that button. We want to hear from you.
It's so easy. And you will not get disappointed.
Yes.
Please cut that last part.